FLJ³ Podcast.
Welcome to FLJ³ Podcast, where we tackle stories and review about readings in the Philippine history. So this episode is entitled Examining the Pros and Cons of the Bates Treaty of 1899, with our speakers, Ms. Fritzi Hannah T. Kamingaw, Ms. Lojen C. Bakang, Ms. Julius M. Kabudoy, and Mr. Jester Van Y. Kali. And our host for today is yours truly, Jalen A. Bessing. So before anything else, let us first discuss what is the story that we will be sharing with you guys today. Based on the title itself, the discussion will revolve about the Bates Treaty of 1899. Way back on August 20, 1899, an agreement was signed in Hulu between United States General John C. Bates and the Sultan of Sulu, Haji Muhammad Hamalul Kiram II, known as the Bates Treaty. It promised to uphold mutual respect between the U.S. and the Sultanate of Sulu, to respect moral autonomy and to not give or sell Sulu or any part of it to any other nation. It also discussed that the Sultan and his datos, or the tribal chiefs, will receive monthly payments in return for flying the American flag and for allowing the U.S. the right to occupy the islands. The treaty, obviously for the U.S. authorities, was a way to stem resistance while they were fighting rebellion in Luzon. And as for the Muslims, who did not wish to come under American sovereignty, recognizing the folly of armed resistance, exerted influence to prevent another useless and bloody war. Last March 1904, this treaty was abrogated unilaterally by the United States. In abrogating the treaty, Secretary of War Taft sent the following cablegram to Governor General Wright on March 2, 1904. So that's everything about the overview of the topic. Now, let's hear from Ms. Fritzi Kamingaw and Mr. Jester Van Kaling to share who are the key people who have been involved in this treaty and their roles upon the establishing of the treaty.
Thank you, Jalen. First in the line is General John C. Bates of the United States and the Sultan of Sulu, Haji Muhammad Hamalul Kiram II, who were the two respected people who agreed about the treaty. When the Americans arrived in Hulu, they told Hamalul Kiram II, the Sultan of Sulu, that the U.S. had taken over the affairs of Spain, and asked the Sultan to recognize the U.S. in the place of Spain and honor the 1878 provisions of the treaty, which the Sultan had signed with Spain. But the Sultan refused, stating that the U.S. was a different entity and that the U.S. should enter into a new treaty with the Sultanate. The Spanish Treaty of Peace, signed in July 22, 1878, was the last one signed by the Sultan during the Spanish occupation of the town of Hulu. The treaty had allowed Spain to set up small garrison, covering about 15 acres in the town of Hulu. Outside the wall, the Sultan still ruled. Scholars fluent in both Spanish and Arabic found the treaty to have translation flaws, which would have implications in the 1898 cession of the Philippine Islands to the U.S. The Spanish version states that Spain had sovereignty over Sulu, whereas the Tausug version describes a protectorate relationship rather than a dependency of Spain. The treaty says that the customs, laws, and religion of Moros would not be subjected to Spanish jurisdiction. It made Hulu a protectorate of Spain. This treaty also provided the Sultan and his datos monthly payments of 250 to 1,500 Mexican pesos. The Sultan had a mistaken impression that the agreement with the Spaniards would be similar to the one he signed 6 months later with the British North Borneo Chartered Company, which paid him $5,000 annually for the use of his North Borneo territories, now the Sabah. The Philippines under President Diosdado Macapagal in 1960s tried to reclaim Sabah in the World Court. This continues to be source of irritation between the Philippine and Malaysian governments. In place of the Spanish, the Sultan presented Bragg, General John Bates with a 16-point proposal. The proposal allowed the U.S. to fly its flag side by side with the Sultanates and required the U.S. to continue monthly payments to the Sultan and his datus. The U.S. was not occupy any of the land without the permission of the Sultan. The Sultan's proposal was rejected by Bates because it did not acknowledge U.S. sovereignty. Bates then countered with his 15-point proposal, which included the recognition of U.S. sovereignty over Sulu and its dependencies, the guarantee of non-interference with moral religion and customs, and a pledge that the U.S. will not sell the island of Hulu or any other island of Sulu archipelago to any foreign nation without the consent of the Sultan.
So, in addition to that, the Sultan resisted Bates' offer for several months, but he could not get unanimous support from his Ruma Bichara or the ruling council to press for his demands to the Americans. Because of this internal dissension, led by his own Prime Minister and advisor Haji Butu and two of his top-ranking datus, Datu Hulkanairn and Datu Kalbi, the Sultan on August 20, 1899 conceded to the Americans. The treaty terms were much more favorable to the U.S. than what the Spanish treaty provided. According to Sixto Orosa, the people did not wish to come under American sovereignty, but Haji Butu, recognizing the folly of armed resistance, exerted all of his influence to prevent another useless and bloody war. Haji Butu and his son, Haji Gulamur Rasul, would later become the favorites of northern Filipinos for opposing the Sultan's Agama court and for favoring integration of Moros into the Philippine Republic.
Well then, thank you for that, Mr. Jester and Miss Fritzy. This time, I want to call out for the other speaker so that she could share what are the positive impacts of the said treaty to the people in the Philippines and to learn more about that part of perspective. May we call on Miss Lojan Bakang to please share her thoughts?
Thank you so much for that, Jaylan. So as mentioned earlier during the period, the Sultan presented Brigadier General John Bates with a 16-point proposal in place of the Spanish agreement. The proposal permitted the U.S. to fly its flag alongside the Sultanates, required the U.S. to keep paying the Sultan and its datus on a monthly basis, and the U.S. was not allowed to occupy any of the territory without the Sultan's authorization. But Bates rejected the Sultan's proposal for a reason, that the proposal did not recognize U.S. sovereignty. Thus, Bates decided to respond with a 15-point proposal that includes recognition of the U.S. sovereignty over Sulu and its dependencies, mutual respect between the U.S. and the Sultanate of Sulu, moral autonomy, assurance of non-interference with the moral religion and customs, and a promise that the U.S. will not sell the island of Sulu or any other island of the Sulu archipelago to any foreign nation without the Sultan's consent. In addition, they also agreed to the proposal of Sultan Hamalul Kiram II that he and his datus, or the tribal chiefs, were to be paid on a monthly basis in exchange for flying the American flag and granting the U.S. the right to occupy lands on the islands.
That's a brief discussion, Miss Loijan. Thank you for that. And to make things fair, we will be hearing also the negative views and opinions of the people towards the treaty, and that will be shared to us by no other than Miss Juris Kabudoy and Mr. Jester Van Kaling. And so, Miss Juris and Mr. Jester, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jalen. So as we all know, despite of the benefits that the Sultanate of Sulu received from the treaty, the said agreement still cannot conceal the real intention or the hidden agenda of the US to this people. When Bates rejected the proposal of the Sultan and then offered a different proposal, the Sultan also resisted Bates' offer for several months because he does not want to recognize US sovereignty over his land. But the Sultan was coerced into doing so because he could not get unanimous support from his Ruma Bichara or ruling council to press for his demands to the Americans. The Sultan, led by his own Prime Minister and advisor Haji Butu, and two of his top datos, Dato Hulkanayirn and Dato Kalbi, submitted to the Americans on August 20, 1899. The conditions of the treaty were far more advantageous to the United States than those of the Spanish agreement. According to Sixto Orosa, the people did not wish to come under American sovereignty, but Haji Buto, recognizing the folly of armed resistance, exerted all his influence to prevent another useless and bloody war. Haji Buto and his son Haji Gulamo Rasul became popular among northern Filipinos for opposing the Sultan's Agama court and advocating for Moros' inclusion into the Philippine Republic. On March 2, 1904, after accomplishing its goal of suppressing resistance in the northern Philippines, the United States unilaterally invalidated the Bates Treaty, claiming that the Sultan had failed to quell Moro resistance and that the treaty was impeding effective colonial administration of the area. The Sultan's and his status payments were also discontinued. Bates, on the other hand, had no intention of ratifying the treaty. As Bates would later confess, the agreement was just meant to buy time until the northern forces were defeated.
So, Bates stated that the treaty was made at a time where nearly all the state volunteers had been sent home and other troops had not arrived to take their places. It was a critical time, as all the troops were needed in Luzon. The government could not afford to stir up trouble with the Moros. The treaty was made as a temporary expedient to avoid trouble. It has served its purpose for 3 years, and there is no reason why the treaty, which was but a temporary measure at a critical time, should not be exchanged in accordance with the conditions. Also, as it is also mentioned that the payments were reinstated when the Sultan started to complain. He said that he really cannot stop more attacks on Americans because the US had placed poll and land taxes on the people, something the Moros were unaccustomed with. In an April 1904 letter to Governor General Duke Wright, the Sultan urged the Americans not to put yokes on our necks that we cannot bear, and don't make us do what is against our religion, and don't ask us to pay poll tax forever and ever as long as there is sun and moon, and don't ask taxes for the land which are our rights of the Moro people, including all the groves in Hulu and its islands. In the end, the idea of Haji Botu to prevent another useless and bloody war still did not work. Instead, it created a ferocious war between American soldiers and Moros, which continued in the south of the Philippines for the next 13 years and happened to that time to be the longest war in U.S. history.
Therefore, it is very clear that the US was only aiming for sovereignty and not settlement. I see. So, thank you so much for that, Miss Juris, Mr. Jester, and Miss Loijan, for the detailed examination of the pros and cons of the Bates Treaty in 1899. Also, I would like to thank the other speaker, Miss Fritzi Camingo, for being here with us as we partake the journey of examining the pros and cons of the Bates Treaty of 1899. Now we are all done. I hope you learned something about the discussion and thank you for listening. Once again, this is your host for today, Jalen A. Bessin, and see you soon in the next episode of FLJ³ Podcast, where we tackle stories and review the readings in the Philippine history. Thank you.